he just goes.
Yeah, introduce the story sack now. Doris, thank you.
This is the Storytelling Association of California, the San Francisco location. And next, our story will be done by James Langdell.
Well, this story, well, last month I told a story from a book I came across of fairy tales by Frank Stockton, who's much better known for the story The Lady and the Tiger. And I told a Christmas story then in November because I'd found two of them, and there was one I wanted to try and tell today. And this story by Frank Stockton is The Poor Count's Christmas. And in a land, there was an area where ruled, which was overseen by a count, the count, excuse me, Count Carmo, and for years and years, he and his wife had just done a lot to improve the lives of the people that were in his lands. And they had gone through famines, and they had sacrificed, the count had sacrificed a lot to help keep people fed and all. So the count had fallen on harder times. And in more recent years, they were hard pressed to carry on just part of a long tradition of caring and helping that they had done, which was at Christmas time. They would have presents and a big feast for all the children to come to. And, each year, the Count and Countess had to sell off more and more of their possessions and their property to be able to afford to do things for the children of the town. And they were talking, he and his wife, the Countess, were talking one night and saying, well, it's going to be very difficult to afford to do things for the children this year, but oh, we must. I could not bear to live another year without helping the children. If we die of this, so be it, but I want to help the children. Well, how are you going to find the money? Well, there's the great decorated bedstead that we have, and I'm going to sell that. And so, oh, that would be terrible. It has been in the family for years and years, and it's renowned as a beautiful object. And says, well, it's all we have left, and all we can do to do something for the children. And the Countess said, well, I guess there's no talking you out of it. I know how generous you are for them and how much this means to you. So that was the sad state that the Count and Countess were in. So now we turn to traveling through the lands nearby. There was a young though getting older giant. And the giant was traveling along at this point with a little fairy. And the fairy could be just a little glowing ball or grow a little bit more to do a bit more, but they were traveling along together, and they found each other good company while traveling, but they were both very hungry. And so they came up to an area and they said to each other, oh, we're in the lands of Count Carmo. He is such a wonderful man. He's just legendary. I've loved his, all could see of him, but I've heard he and his wife have fallen on very hard times. And so the giant said to the fairy, why don't you go to see Count Como? I'm sure that if you're hungry, you can find the little crumbs that will do for you to feel fed and nourished there. and I'll go into the woods and hunt for and forage for things that I can eat. As my appetite would be far more than I'm sure would be a burden to them. And so they split up. And when they reunited for back at that point, the fairy was reporting back of, oh yes, I found the count's you know estate, and oh he and his wife, they are just in poorer state than I've ever imagined of that. I found enough crumbs for myself, but the two of them had little more than that. And they were talking about selling the family's famous bedstead. Oh no, not the bedstead. Yes, it was, it would be such a loss, but he's doing it to support the children. Says, well, I wish we could do something for them, but we are, as poor off as we can. So they traveled a little further, and and the giant said to the fairy, well, we have found the crossroads here, where where you will turn, where you can go to off in one direction to reach your fairy glen, and I'll continue on the other road. And the fairy said, well, where are you going? And saying, well, I am going to check on my uncle's castle. He is a very rich giant, and I will inherit from him. And I've not heard from him from a long time, so I'm going to check to see if he has died and if I have come into my inheritance. And the fairy said, well, I think I will travel with you a little further there. I would like to be with you for that. So they travel further, and they eventually come to, site of a great castle, and they come, a great large castle built for a giant and many giants to live in. They are approaching it, and a warden calls it, oh, halt, who are you coming onto the land of the Katafara? And he said, the land of Katafara that's not my uncle. Well, your uncle died a month. I've come to find if he is alive and to help claim my part of the inheritance. And say, well, everything's already been distributed, and Katafara lives and here now. So, there's nothing to be had. Well, I would like to see for myself. And so the giant goes along with and the fairy was hiding up his sleeve as they follow Katafara there. And the Katafara, he said, well, if you are, there's everything's already been distributed, but there's some things left. You may find something worthwhile here. And led him into a dusty old room, and said, well, this is all that there's left to claim here. You might, here's a lovely door hinge. You may find another like it somewhere, and it'll be good on a door somewhere. Saying, why don't you take this fine drum champ? And the fairy had sort of slipped out of his sleeve and sort of flown through the castle, and then came back and whispered to the, to the young giant, there are many more rooms here. You should make sure to see them. And say, well, I don't think that's all that there is. I'd like to see what's in this next room here. And the warden says, oh no, there's nothing more. I think I'll see for myself. And he sort of pushed through the door. And in that room, there was much beautiful, just vast amounts of beautiful furniture and decorations stored away there. And the young giant said, oh, okay, I have a good share of this. Why, the giant that you mentioned is only the fifth cousin of the of my uncle, and he's my uncle, so I have a bit more of a claim. And I'm going to take this chalk, magic chalk that will not disappear, and mark on all the furniture that I'll ask you to send to me later. And he went about doing that, and you could see that, Kadafara was, just sort of ignoring. Sure, I'm going to send that to him. And he said, oh, and the fairy said, there is another room. And so they went on, he insisted on, opening the door, of going to another room. And there was just a storehouse there of all sorts of money, all sorts of coins, all sorts of jewels and all that. Says, well, I'm going to mark with my chalk the bags, the sacks of money and the little bags of jewels that I'm claiming as my share, and I want those sent to me later. And Codifar was just looking, like, oh yeah, sure, that's going to happen. And then as after he marked all the things, and he found one bag of very tiny, precious but beautiful diamonds, and he marked that with the chalk, and he whispered to the fairy, that's going to be yours. And so they went about it, and then before leaving that room, he said, actually, I'm going to take the thing with me. And he gathered all of the cash and that little bag of jewels that he had marked, and took them with him. And he and the fairy, still hid, back being hidden in his sleeve, left there and returned to the road. And the and the fairy asked the giant, so what will you be doing next, now that you have this wealth? And the giant said, well, I had planned to go and give much of this to, restore the Count Carmo, because he has a better idea of how to do good for people than any others. And the fairy says, that's exactly the right idea, but the Count is very, very proud, and I'm not sure you can get him to accept help, but I have an idea. So came Christmas Eve. The the Count and the Countess had prepared all of the things to celebrate, and with the children, far less than they ever hope to intend, but at least they get a little food to share and be together. And as they were preparing, because they had no one to help them at this point, they had no servants anymore. They just were, preparing things to greet the children, perhaps this one last time that they could manage. And, and then they heard all the joyous sounds of hundreds of children, far more than had been there for years and years, all gathered. And some of the older ones of them, and they were just all there. So, oh my goodness, we will not be able to feed all of them. What can we do? Well, we must at least come and give them greetings. And they came, and they found the children then there were all greeting them and saying, and says, you must come to the great hall, you must come to the great hall. Says, oh no, that part of our estate has been just, we had to close that up and board it up 12 years ago. It's we just couldn't afford to keep that going. We had sold all the furniture, but the children insisted, and they came and gathered in there, and it was just all clean and beautiful, and there was some beautiful furniture there. It was some, and then and there was a magnificent large tree, and hanging from this tree were all sorts of things with the names of the children on it. And, but they weren't gifts to the children. It was telling from each child what they were giving to the Count and Countess for Christmas. And many of these things, as the Count and Count, as they were brought to the Count and Countess, they recognized as things that had been, family treasures from their lives that they'd had to sell off years ago, but they were found and were brought there. And among the names were some on the presents. There were also some from the giant and from the fairy, names that they didn't initially recognize. But they just also, and there was a feast brought out and everyone was happy. But then at one point, the children all, nodded their heads and started saying, "They did it, they did it, they did it all." And they pointed and danced around the giant and the fairy and said, "The fairy told us all the things to find and get, and the giant gave us all the money to do it, to give to you, and we're so happy to do this." And the Count and Countess were just flabbergasted at all this and thankful of the giant and the fairy, who were just wanting to remain anonymous while doing this because they didn't want the count to think that anyone in particular had gone to give them that help. But they were so moved on that, and the count, but they just had a great time then celebrating Christmas together. And the count said to the giant there, "Well, this is just wonderful. What can I do to thank you?" And the giant said, "Well, my uncle is dead. I don't have any other relations I want anything to do with. Would you adopt me?" "Oh, so gladly. Yes, we can all live together." And to that day, the giant lived with and helped help the Count and Countess find ways to be generous and to enjoy the rest of their days. So this, like other story, as I say, Frank Stockton is best known for The Lady and the Tiger, the story that just leaves you after you read it wondering, okay, which way did it end? And I think after coming across more of his fairy tales, they just have these very optimistic outcomes. That in the other story, it was the lady, not the tiger.
Thank you. Thank you, James. So lovely. Thank you. I think a
Yeah.
great yeah, wonderful.
That was very good and such a long story. You did very well.
Well, I thought of tackling a few longer things, and thank you for your patience in listening.
Oh, of course.
Cresselia, do you like to tell stories? Would you like to tell a story today? And if you want to tell a story, do you want to be recorded?
Not today. I thought today I would listen to everyone's stories, and next time I'll tell one. I do like to tell stories.
Okay, wonderful. All right. And Miriam or Janet, do you have a story for us?
Well, I do, but I'm going to read it if that's okay. And
Sure,
I
of
can be
course.
recorded.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to get a blanket real quick.
Do I have to do anything else?
No, you may begin.
Thank you. The name of the story is The Tablecloth. Can you hear me all right?
Yes,
Okay.
you're fine.
Oh, good. Okay. The brand new pastor and his wife, newly assigned to their first ministry, to reopen a church in suburban Brooklyn arrived in early October, excited about their opportunities. When they saw their church, it was very rundown and needed much work. They set a goal to have everything done in time to have their first service on Christmas Eve. They worked hard, repairing pews, plastering walls, painting, etc., and on December 18th were ahead of schedule and just about finished. On December 19th, a terrible tempest, a driving rainstorm hit the area and lasted for 2 days. On the 21st, the pastor went over to the church. His heart sunk when he saw that the roof had leaked, causing a large area of plaster about 6 feet by 8 feet to fall off the front wall of the sanctuary just behind the pulpit, beginning about head high. The pastor cleaned up the mess on the floor and, not knowing what else to do but postpone the Christmas Eve service, headed home. On the way, he noticed that a local business was having a flea market type sale for charity, so he stopped in. One of the items was a beautiful, handmade, ivory-colored crocheted tablecloth with exquisite work, fine colors, and a cross embroidered right in the center. It was just the right size to cover up the hole in the front wall. He bought it and headed back to the church. By this time, it had started to snow. An older woman running from the opposite direction was trying to catch the bus. She missed it. The pastor invited her to wait in the warm church for the next bus 45 minutes later. She sat in the pew and paid no attention to the pastor while he got a ladder, hangers, etc., to put up the table as a wall tapestry. The pastor could hardly believe how beautiful it looked, and it covered up the entire problem area. Then he noticed the woman walking down the center aisle. Her face was like a sheet. "Pastor," she asked, "where did you get that tablecloth?" The pastor explained. The woman asked him to check the lower right-hand corner to see if the initials EBG were crocheted into it there. They were. These were the initials of the woman, and she had made this tablecloth 35 years before in Austria. The woman could hardly believe it, as the pastor told how he had just gotten the tablecloth. The woman explained that before the war, she and her husband were well-to-do people in Austria. When the Nazis came, she was forced to leave. Her husband was going to follow her the next week. She was captured, sent to prison, and never saw her husband or her home again. The pastor wanted to give her the tablecloth, but she made the pastor keep it for the church. The pastor insisted on driving her home. That was the least he could do. She lived on the other side of Staten Island and was only in Brooklyn for the day for a house cleaning job. What a wonderful service they had on Christmas Eve. The church was almost full. The music and the spirit were great. At the end of the service, the pastor and his wife greeted everyone at the door, and many said that they would return. One older man, whom the pastor recognized from the neighborhood, continued to sit in one of the pews and stare. And the pastor wondered why he wasn't leaving. The man asked him where he got the tablecloth on the front wall, because it was identical to one that his wife had made years ago when they lived in Austria before the war. And how could there be two tablecloths so much alike? He told the pastor how the Nazis came, how he forced his wife to flee for her safety, and he was supposed to follow her, but he was arrested and put in prison. He never saw his wife or his home again, or all the 35 years in between. The pastor asked him if he would allow him to take him for a little ride. They drove to Staten Island and to the same house where the pastor had taken the woman 3 days earlier. He helped the man climb the 3 flights of stairs to the woman's apartment, knocked on the door, and he saw the greatest Christmas reunion he could ever imagine.
All
The
right.
end.
And
What a
loud,
great-
loud. Oh, Janet, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Very nice. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go next. Um, my name is
Sure.
Doris, and I can be recorded. The story I'm going to tell you is one that I'm going to be telling on Christmas Eve at our Episcopal Church in Diamond Heights in San Francisco. It is called Bridget's Cloak, an ancient Irish story. It's written by Rice, B-R-Y-C-E, Milligan. All right. It was a wild and windy night 15 centuries ago when in Ireland a special child was born. Her father was Duffy, a warrior prince and lord of the Fargot Hill. You would think that the little girl, it was a girl and her name was to be Bridget, you would think that Bridget would have a princess for a mother. No. Bridget was born in a cold hut outside the fort of Duffy. She was to be born a slave child to a slave mother. The wind groaned and swirled that night, and the people who lived in those round huts thought that the thatch would be blown off their homes. But when the baby's first cry was heard, the wind ceased. And the people all went outside to look up at the sky, swept clean of clouds by the wind. And one of the people said, "Listen, the stars are singing." And indeed, the stars were singing. They were singing not like we would sing, but rather like the song of a first songbird or a bubbling brook in spring. It was lovely, those singing stars. And then someone else said, "Look, a star has fallen into the forest." And someone else said, "No, it can't be a star. It's moving towards us." And sure enough, it was a lantern on top of a very long staff coming towards them, being carried by a tall old man in long robes with a long white beard that had holly leaves that got stuck to his robe somehow. And when he walked out of the forest, all the people who came to watch him, they stepped away. They knew who this was. He was a druid who lived in the oak grove in the center of the forest. And they knew that druids were wizards, and they could tell the future. The druid walked right past them, walked down the hill, and went to the hut where the new baby was born. He knocked on the door. The voice inside said, "Come in." And he entered, and there was the new mother holding the little baby girl in her arms. And she said to him in a polite greeting, "May God be with you." And the druid said, "It is your God who has been with me. I was told in a dream to bring this as a gift to little Bridget." And he held out a royal blue cloak. Now, blue was a very unusual color at these times. If blue garments were to be held to be have it all, they would only be by royalty. And he took little Bridget and he wrapped her into that quilt, that cloak, and he held her up and he said, Bridget, this cloak will be a sign of God's favor of you. And he said, I am one of the old fathers of the old Ireland, but you, Bridget, will be one of the new mothers of the new Ireland that is to come. And he gave the baby back to the mother, and he made a special blessing sign with his staff. And he turned around and left. What did he mean? The druid didn't explain, and certainly no one asked. And the Bridget went back into the forest. Well, those words were long remembered. They were not forgotten. That little Bridget would be the mother of the new Ireland that was to come. Now, 10 years passed. Some were good years, some were ill years. And at this time, Bridget at 10 had been given a small flock of fluffy sheep to take care of. And every day she would take them up to graze and she would bring them back at the end of the day. And even in the coldness, like now was a very cold day in December, close to Christmas, she would take the sheep out and she would bring the sheep back. Now she liked to pretend that bright star up in the sky was the Christmas star, and that she was one of the shepherds on the way to Bethlehem to see the baby Jesus. Well, she came to her stable. She came in with her animals. She put the sheep away and gave them hay. She patted each of the cows on the head and called them by name and gave them hay. And then Bridget always knelt down for a prayer at the end of the day. And today she prayed a prayer of gratitude because none of her animals had been eaten by wolves. And when she stood up to go back to her hut for supper, she went out the door. Everything was strange. She was in the stable, but it wasn't her stable. And outside, the air was not bitterly cold. It was warm and dusty, and the houses weren't round with thatch on top. No, they were square, made of stone, with narrow streets between them. Where was she? What was this? And then she saw a man running down the street, and he was saying, what has taken you so long, daughter? We have guests. You must come home and help me with the supper. Was that Duffy? How could it be Duffy here? So she followed him up the hill into his square house. And he was apparently an innkeeper because there were people waiting there for their suppers. So she ladled stew into their bowls. She cut thick slices of hard bread and she refilled and refilled cups of wine. When they all were done with their supper, they went to their rooms, and then she had the dishes to watch and the floor to sweep and other rooms to take care of. And finally, it was quiet, and she sat down to rest on a bench close to the front door in the kitchen. It was very quiet then. Then she heard a knock on the door. Please, a kind voice said, my wife is tired and she needs somewhere to rest. Might you have a room? And then Duffy, he called out and he said, tell him to go away. We have no room. But the voice sounded so kind that Bridget opened the door. And there she saw a tall, bearded man and a small woman sitting on a donkey. And the man said, my name is Joseph. This is my wife, Mary, and she really needs a place to rest. Now, it was all clear to Bridget now in her mind why she was there and what she must do. Come with me, she said. And she took them down the hill to the stable. And in the stable, she and Joseph spread hay all over. And Joseph took off his cloak and laid it on the hay and helped Mary be comfortable. And then, even though it was warm and Bridget wasn't cold, Mary was shivering. Mary was shivering. And so Bridget took off that blue cloak that she has worn every day for 10 years, that had been given to her by the Druid. And now it was just in tatters. And she put it around the woman's shoulders. And she said, "You need some water." And she left to run up to the inn. She searched for a jar, a big, heavy clay pot that she might put water in. And it took her a long time to fill it. And she carried that heavy jug down the hill to the stable. And outside the stable, she heard the sound, that gentle cooing of a newborn baby. And when she went inside, she saw Mary holding a new baby. And Joseph took the jug of water and set it aside. And he took the baby from Mary's arm and gave it to Bridget to hold while he helped his wife have some sips of water. And then Mary said, well, Mary took the baby and laid the baby down in a cow's manger filled with fresh hay. And she said to Mary, "Oh, blessed are you. Blessed are you, holy woman, and blessed is your holy child." And then this beautiful music came through the window, lovely, lovely music, and this gold radiant color filled the stable and was so special. And then Mary took off Bridget's cloak and she gave it to Joseph and she said, "Please give this back to Mary. Help her put it on." And Joseph put the cloak on Mary's shoulders. Then Joseph put the cloak on Bridget's shoulders. And then Bridget heard her name being called. "Bridget, Bridget, where are you? Why aren't you home?" And when she looked around, she wasn't in that holy stable anymore. No, she was in her own stable with her cows and her sheep. And there at the door was her mother, her angry mother, and several other slave women. And they said to her, especially her mother, where have you been? Where have you been? We were worried about you. It's dark outside. It's very cold. Where have you been? And then her mother looked at this cloak that Bridget was wearing. And she said, "Bridget, where did you get that cloak?" And little Bridget said, "Oh, it's just my old cloak." But then she looked at it. It was a royal blue cloak that now was covered with stars. And they said, "Where have you been?" And Bridget said, "I have been in Bethlehem." Bridget goes on to be a very famous saint in Ireland. And there are some who say that we know about St. Patrick, and she was born a few years right before St. Patrick died, that perhaps St. Bridget should be the most revered saint in Ireland. That's the end. Thank you. That was hard to learn.
No, that
We-
has a lot to it.
Thank you for listening.
Yep. That was beautiful. I loved it, Doris. Thank
And
you.
this is the second time I've said that the cape went around Mary or vice versa. Anyway, but I'm going to get it straight by Christmas Eve. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very
The
much.
details in the scenery that help put us there in the place, which brings us in. I
And the
appreciate-
illustrations on that little book, well, this book here, are
Yeah,
lovely.
and when we move it from the book to oral, we need to describe, and you did an excellent job. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. I came upon this book last year with the help of a librarian. I said, "I need a Christmas story from Ireland." And there you go. Librarians are remarkable people. Thank you. Now, Miriam, would you like to tell us a story?
I have one, and it's another saint.
And would you like to record it?
Yes, we'll just keep going here. It's okay. So this is about, you may have heard of Saint Nicholas. What do we think about Saint Nicholas? Well, he's kind of changed into Santa Claus. And what do we do with Santa Claus? Well, when it's not COVID, people go up to him. Even now they're going on Zoom to Saint Nicholas and Santa Claus. Why? To tell him what they want. This is what I want. This is what I want. And it sounds like it's all about them, you know? This is what I want. Just too much commercialization, I think, about, you know, Christmas these days and what Santa's going to bring them. But what about other people? That's what we really want to think of. This is a time, you know, more for generosity. And what are some people that have encouraged people across the ages to be generous and giving to others? One of them was Nicholas. He was born in a wealthy family in 280 AD. It was a little town of Patara, which is in Asia Minor. But his parents died when he was young. However, in that young time, though, that he was with them, they were still able to teach him values and generosity. They taught him the joy of generosity, the gift of faith, and they helped him learn inside himself to give to others. When he grew up, he was raised by another family, and when he grew up, though, he moved to Myra, it's Indonesian Myra, and he was very generous all the time. He was self-offering, he gave of himself, and kind of a life with sacrifice and caring and loving other people. He lived such a Christ-like life that when the town needed a bishop, immediately they elected him. But Emperor Constantine came into power. He was very self-serving, and everybody had to honor him, worship him. And if you worshiped anything else, that was it. He imprisoned the citizens who did. He imprisoned Nicholas for his Christian faith. Later, let's see, Emperor Constantine, that was the one, he released Nicholas. And so he was back to his life of being very generous to others. There were stories about him being very generous. And he not only gave away things he had, he would go around begging for food, but it was not for him, it was for poor people. So the stories about him, how generous he was, just went about from mouth to mouth throughout the land about how generous this Nicholas fellow was. They told about how he begged for food for the poor and how he was generous. And most often, they would talk about that he started disguising himself. He'd go out, he would have on a disguise, and he would give gifts to the poor children. In fact, he gave away everything he had, plus everything he could get from anyone else, and give it to the poor. He was just 34 years old, but in those days, that was a full life. He died in 314 AD. His body was moved to Italy, and that is where it is said to be today. The story of Nicholas, it has spread all around the world. And of all the European churches, there's more named out of after Saint Nicholas than any other person in history, except for the biblical characters. People have done many things with that Saint Nicholas character. Clement Moore, the poet, he's the one that gave him a red nose and 8 tiny reindeers. But the artist Thomas Nast, he gave Nicholas a round belly, and a red full trimmed suit. All these things are a Santa Claus character. But what is vital of all of it really is that he had lived in a mindset and a lifestyle of Christ. Because he lived in that way, it's the life of Nicholas who touched the entire world. And that's a true story of old Saint Nick. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
That's not commonly known, is it, Miriam? So
No.
nice told. Yeah.
There's just bringing to mind there's a wonderful piece of music by Benjamin Britten called Saint Nicholas, for chorus and for the audience to sing at a couple of points as well. I'd never heard of it until I sang it with a group when I was in New York, and it just weaves together a lot of these stories of Saint Nicholas, along with other legends that have surrounded him. But it's a wonderful, moving piece of music that I look forward to listening to again for this. But it was fun to sing that with a group when I was in New York.
I wonder if it might be on YouTube. I think I'm going to try to look.
I can probably find some degree of stagings of that.
Thank you. I would like to ask about, shall we have our meeting again next month, which would require Miriam to host it, since the magic of Zoom has eluded me. Would you mind, Marian?
It's just fine. I'll do that.
Okay,
I'll
thank
put
you.
it on my
Perfect.
calendar.
All right, which will be
That the second Thursday.
in January. Yes. Oh, good. January the 14th. Okay,
There
thank
it
you.
is. I got it. It's already on my calendar.
Thank you so much.
It's already
Yeah.
there.
Perfect. There was a chat that came from Chryselia, which said that she was sorry she had to leave. She had another Zoom meeting at 11 o'clock, but she
Okay.
looked forward to seeing us next time in the new year, 2021. It's very hard to believe.
It's true.
Yeah. So now, okay, Miriam, now I say thank you everyone for coming.
Well, let me give the announcements. We'll
Right.
stop recording while we chit chat. So thank you everyone for coming to our Zoom. And
Merry
see
Christmas.
everybody later.
Thank you, Rhoda.
Thank you. It was a great meeting.